Well, today we are on the Apostle Peter, number 24 in the series, and I'd like to entitle today's sharing with you, Our Fantastic Ability. It is actually a very short text, but by the same token, there are also many cross-references that are not as short as this one. So we start off with the actual text itself, and then we'll go on to the other cross-references. Okay? Mark chapter 10, we'll read just 3 verses, verse 32 on. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "we are going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans," that is literally to the Gentiles or to the nations, "and they will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, kill him, but after 3 days he will rise again." Now, we have a fantastic capacity for various things as human beings. We have a fantastic capacity for both good and evil. You see people doing great good, and you see people also doing great evil. We have a fantastic capacity for clear thinking, when people can think so clearly, and yet we have the capacity for self-deception. We have a fantastic capacity for insatiable greed, and at the same time, we can learn contentment with very little in life. We can have false hope of greatness, and yet find true hope when we are faced with disappointment. Wherein lies this human capacity? And I think we see that in the disciples when they were following Jesus. Jesus told his disciples at least 3 times that he must die and he was going to rise from the dead, but they chose not to hear him. So I think all these demonstrate to us the fantastic capacity for our selective information. We choose what we want to hear, in other words. We almost always choose what we want to hear. So 3 times Jesus told them that he was going to die, but they somehow didn't understand him. Now, the text that we read today was actually the 3rd time. So there were actually 2 other times that Jesus said this to them. The first is found in Mark chapter 8. Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Now, the Apostle Peter remembered this very well, because he was the one who couldn't take it anymore. He's saying, "Jesus, why are you saying all these bad things? You speak in riddles, but whatever it is, please don't say such unlucky things," or whatever term that he might have used. It sounded absolutely horrible. In fact, in other places we are told the disciples were wondering what he meant. Perhaps he's going to die spiritually and, like a phoenix rise up again, or what? They couldn't understand him, but whatever it was, Peter says, "This is terrible, please don't talk about this." Now, that was an incident that Peter would never forget, because Jesus turned to him and rebuked him in return and said, "Satan, get behind me. You do not understand the things of God." So here was this first open encounter when Jesus told his disciples, "I'm going to die and I'm going to rise from the dead." And Peter was the one who couldn't accept it. And this is why you see it so clearly in Mark's Gospel, as Peter clearly remembered this bruising encounter with Jesus. And so it was deeply imprinted in Peter's mind. The second time was found in Mark chapter 9, verse 30. Leaving that region, that is in the region of Galilee and Capernaum, they traveled through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know he was there, for he wanted to spend some time with his disciples. So he wanted some exclusive conversation with his disciples, and he didn't want a big crowd following, so he spent time aside with them. And when he was alone with them, this was what he told them. He said, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead. They didn't understand what he was saying. However, they were afraid to ask him what he meant. Peter was scolded once, so they also kept clear, didn't want to ask Jesus what was meant anymore. And of course, the third time was the passage that we were just reading a while ago. So this was an exclusive conversation with greater details, and Jesus telling them that, he would die and would rise from the dead. But somehow they were not listening to him. Now, why didn't the disciples get it? Why didn't the disciples get it? I believe the disciples probably gave this some kind of a spiritual interpretation. Also, alternatively, that their concept of the kingdom of God was so limited to all the earthly elements that Jesus is going to become king of the Jews, he's going to sit in Jerusalem and rule as king, and he's going to subjugate all the other nations around, and that was their fixed view of what the kingdom of God was about. It was deeply ingrained in them. They could not think of the temple being destroyed. They could not think of Jerusalem being destroyed. They could only think of themselves as the inheritors of God's kingdom. And so with all that in mind, the death of Jesus just cannot fit into their scheme. So they had a scheme that didn't quite fit into what Jesus said. So Jesus told them that there will be an impending judgment on the nation of Israel, the temple, and Jerusalem. Now, not only did Jesus say that he was going to die, Jesus was actually quite clear that 3 other things are going to happen. 3 other disasters are going to happen. The nation of Israel would be destroyed, the temple would be destroyed, and Jerusalem would be destroyed after his death. So, actually he was quite clear. And let me illustrate to you where Jesus said all this. Right in this passage in Mark chapter 10, the next day as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Now you may be wondering, if it's not the season for figs, and there are all these leaves, why did Jesus curse the fig tree? I mean, after all, it's not season for figs. Well, if you know how the figs behave, the figs will have little fruits. Although it's not yet time to harvest the figs, it takes time to grow. And some trees, when they have too many leaves, they cannot bear fruits. So from a distance, it looks like it's very healthy, full of leaves. But those of you who are in agriculture know that actually you don't want too many leaves. When it has too many leaves and it's too bushy, there are no fruits. So this tree looks like it's very healthy with all the leaves, but there are no fruits on it. And then Jesus cursed it, and that was what happened. In another parable, in another incident, the people said, well, give this tree another year or so. And so the farmer pruned it and did all kinds of stuff, and it still didn't bear fruit. So the following year, the farmer then cut it down. So 2 different stories about the fig tree, but they are related ones. And in this particular case, Jesus looked at the fig tree, knew it was barren, it was pretending to be fruitful, but not fruitful at all, and Jesus cursed it. So they were journeying towards Jerusalem. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. So you must see the sequence. He cursed the fig tree, he went to the temple, he cleansed the temple, chased all the merchants out, and then what happened? And then when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. Now, normally when a tree dies, it doesn't die immediately. But this was really a miracle. Amazing that the tree withered from the roots up and it was dying and it was just dead overnight. And have faith in God, Jesus answered. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their hearts, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Here we see actually three themes interwoven. First of all, the fig tree represents Israel. Until today, it is the symbol of Israel. When you look at the symbol of Israel, they will always have the fig tree. Okay, it's like the Lebanon will have a cedar, the cedars of Lebanon. That's their national symbol. Like Singapore's symbol is the orchid, correct? Malaysia's symbol is the hibiscus, for example. So every country chooses a plant to have their national plant. And Israel's national plant is the fig tree. And so when the fig does not bear fruit and it is cursed and it dies on the spot, it is a lesson. It is a lesson that judgment is about to come on the nation of Israel. And then we are told another theme is the cleansing of the temple. Many times we read this story of the cleansing of the temple and we don't really sort of pin it down. Why does Jesus in the last week of his life goes into the temple, chase some people out and prevent selling and say this is a house of prayer? But what does it accomplish? What does it accomplish? Where does it fit into the grand scheme of things? And where it fits in is this. Jesus is saying that this temple is not what it should be. In fact, in the final days, we are told Jesus said that he himself is the temple. And therefore, this temple has done its job, it has failed in its task, and this is why it needs to be cleaned out. Okay, so that is actually another object lesson about the impending destruction of the temple. But later on, he made an even more clear prophecy. And the third one is about this mountain. And many times people quote this quotation talking about faith. If you have enough faith, you'll call this mountain and it will disappear and all that, and therefore whatever you ask will be given to you. But we forget what this mountain is. This mountain is the mountain on which Jerusalem sits. Jesus is saying, if you have faith, take this mountain and command it to be cast into the sea, and it will be cast into the sea. So what is he saying? He is saying that the nation of Israel, Jerusalem, will be no more. It will be cast into the sea, and the sea is normally used to represent the Gentiles. So all these three are judgments on Israel. Not only did he predict his death, he said, after I die, certain other things are going to happen. The temple will be no more. The nation of Israel will be no more. Jerusalem will be no more. Okay. And all these things were a prediction of judgment and of the doom that was to come. And again in Mark 13, as Jesus was leaving the temple that day, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones on the walls." Jesus replied, "Yes, look at these great buildings. But they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." And about less than 40 years later, when the Romans came, that was exactly what happened. They literally took apart every single stone in the temple. Literally every single one. And they did that because, some of you may know, the walls of the temple was coated with gold. And when the temple was burnt, the gold melted and went into the cracks of all the stones. So they literally pried every stone apart to get to the gold. So there wasn't a single stone left on top of the other. And the prophecy happened exactly as Jesus said it. So he prophesied the destruction of the temple, of Jerusalem, and of the entire nation of Israel. Okay? And today there's the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall was a section of the wall that the Romans left behind to remind the people that once there was a great city. Once there was a powerful people, but look at how powerful we are. We destroyed them. So when you look at the Wailing Wall, it's a huge wall. It's a strong wall. You wouldn't think that people can storm this wall. But the Romans said, I'm just going to leave one section to remind you that we were here. Just in case everything is destroyed, and then people say, well, was there really this stuff that went on? So I'm going to leave this as a monument. And today the Jews go there and they wail for the destruction of Jerusalem. And they remind themselves that Jerusalem was destroyed. And see, some people are so pro-Israel, even to this day, they don't read these parables. Embedded in this whole section are so many parables. Jesus said that there was a farmer who owned land, and he went away, and then he sent some servants to collect the rent, and the tenants killed his servants, beat his servants up. Eventually he sent his own son, and they killed the son. so that they can seize the estate. And so there were all these different stories about Israel's rejection of the Messiah, how they would kill the Messiah, and how eventually judgment would come on Israel. So that is the reality. Jesus kept saying it, but somehow they just couldn't read it. It was very selective reasoning on their parts. But what is our connection today? What has that got to do with us? We don't have these same problems, do we? But even we do, they are quite theoretical ones.